Sarah had spent the first week of December wrapped in tinsel and good intentions. Every spare evening was dedicated to the meticulous art of pleasing the Ashworth family. Her husband Mark's wealthy, patrician clan who seemed to regard her less as a daughter-in-law and more as a persistent draft under a very expensive door. She had handpicked a cashmere scarf for Eleanor, her mother-in-law, in a shade of dove gray that matched the woman's cold, appraising eyes. For her father-in-law, Richard, a first-edition collection of maritime maps, because he liked to talk about his yacht at dinner parties, and Sarah had learned that listening was her primary function. She had wrapped a vintage whiskey decanter for Mark's older brother, Julian, and a silk dress for his sister, Penelope, who always managed to compliment Sarah's outfits in a way that sounded like a diagnosis. The tree in their modest but lovingly decorated living room stood 7 feet tall, its stars slightly crooked because Mark had refused to get the ladder. Sarah had baked 3 kinds of cookies, written 20 Christmas cards, and even scheduled a blowout for her hair on the morning of the 24th. She had chosen her dress, deep burgundy velvet, elegant but not showy, and rehearsed the correct responses to Eleanor's inevitable jabs. Yes, I'm still freelancing. It gives me flexibility. No, we're not thinking about children just yet. The timing isn't right. Of course, I understand that the Ashworth legacy is important. I'm just happy to be part of the family. That last lie had become easier over 3 years of marriage. Almost comfortable. Mark was stretched out on the sofa, scrolling through his phone, his feet bare on the coffee table despite Sarah's repeated requests for coasters. He was handsome in that effortless, inherited way. Good bone structure, no anxiety lines, the confidence of a man who had never been told he didn't belong somewhere. Mark, is your mother still expecting us at 7 on Christmas Eve? Sarah asked, folding a batch of freshly ironed napkins. I want to confirm with the caterer for the canapes. He said without looking up. Yeah, 7. Don't overthink it. I'm not overthinking. I'm planning. There's a difference. He smirked. Sure, babe. That was the rhythm of their marriage. Sarah doing, Mark dismissing. She had once loved his easygoing nature, mistook it for stability. Now she understood that his calm was not the product of inner peace, but of never having to worry, because someone else always carried the worry for him. Her phone rang at 3:47 p.m. on the Tuesday before Christmas. The screen displayed Eleanor Ashworth in elegant serif letters. Sarah took a breath, smoothed her hair, and answered with a smile she could feel straining her cheeks. Eleanor, how lovely to hear from you. I was just finalizing the dessert platter for Sarah. The voice on the other end was clipped, polished, and utterly devoid of warmth. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. Sarah's smile faltered. Oh, is everything all right? Perfectly. Simply an adjustment. Eleanor paused, and Sarah could hear the soft clink of what was probably a very expensive teacup. The venue for Christmas dinner has been moved to a smaller property, a little lodge in the countryside. Very charming, very select. As a result, we've had to downsize the guest list. Drastically. Downsize? Sarah's fingers tightened on the phone. What do you mean? How many people? Immediate blood relatives only, Eleanor said. The words landed like tiny, precise knife throws. It's an intimate gathering, just the core Ashworths. I'm sure you understand. Sarah stood very still in her kitchen, surrounded by cookie tins and garlands. Eleanor, I'm Mark's wife. I am immediate family. A sigh. The kind of sigh that carries the weight of 1,000 unspoken criticisms. Let's be honest, Sarah. You just wouldn't fit in with the crowd this year. The conversation, the tone, it's very much a family matters event. Business, legacy, that sort of thing. You'd feel out of place. And frankly, it would be awkward for everyone. The word awkward hung in the air like an executioner's blade. Sarah's throat tightened. Does Mark know about this? Mark is aware, yes. He'll be attending, of course. He's an Ashworth. Eleanor emphasized the surname as if it were a royal title. You, on the other hand, well, you have your own traditions, I'm sure. Perhaps you could visit your mother, the one in the small town? That might be nice. My mother is dead, Eleanor. A beat of silence. Then, oh, yes, well, I'm sure you'll find something to do. The lodge simply cannot accommodate extra people. I'm sorry if this upsets you, but these are the realities of grown-up family life. Goodbye, Sarah. The line went dead. Sarah stood in the kitchen, the phone pressed to her ear long after the dial tone had begun its monotonous hum. The burgundy velvet dress hung in the bedroom closet, still wrapped in its dry-cleaning plastic. The cashmere scarf sat in its gift box. The maritime maps, the whiskey decanter, the silk dress, all of it, suddenly absurd. She found Mark in the living room, now watching television with the casual air of a man who had not just allowed his wife to be exiled from Christmas. Mark, your mother just uninvited me from Christmas dinner. He didn't look away from the screen. She mentioned they had to downsize. It's no big deal. No big deal. Sarah's voice cracked. She said I wouldn't fit in with the crowd. She suggested I visit my dead mother. That's not what she meant, and you know it. Mark finally turned his head, and his expression was one of mild irritation, like she had interrupted a mildly interesting documentary. You always take everything so personally. It's a small family thing. I'll go. I'll do the rounds, and I'll be back by midnight. You can have a quiet night in. Watch a movie. Relax. Relax, Sarah repeated. On Christmas Eve, alone, while my husband eats dinner with the people who just told me I don't belong. You're being dramatic. I'm being hurt, Mark. There's a difference. He stood up, and for a moment, she thought he might hug her. Instead, he walked past her to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator. Look, my mother is particular. You know that. But if you make this into a thing, you'll only prove her point. What point? He pulled out a beer, twisted off the cap, and took a long drink. That you're difficult. That you don't understand how our family works. Sarah felt something inside her chest splinter. 3 years of trying. 3 years of remembering everyone's birthdays, allergies, and petty grievances. 3 years of biting her tongue while Eleanor made comments about her creative career and her interesting taste in decor. 3 years of being the peacekeeper, the planner, the pleaser. And this was her reward. Fine, she said quietly. Mark raised an eyebrow. Fine. You go to your family's intimate blood relatives only dinner. I'll stay here. But before you go, I want to check something. Check what? She didn't answer. She walked to the small home office they shared, sat down at the desk, and opened her laptop. Her fingers moved automatically, logging into their joint bank account, the one they had opened after the wedding. The account where both their salaries were deposited. The account that was supposed to be theirs. The page loaded. For a long moment, Sarah stared at the screen without blinking. The balance was $47.23. Yesterday, it had been over $12,000. Enough for her share of the rent, the bills, the groceries, and the carefully saved Christmas gifts. Now, nearly everything was gone. A series of large transfers had been made over the past week, all to an account she didn't recognize. The final transfer, dated that very morning, was for $10,000. The memo line read, *holiday expenses, Eleanor. Sarah's hands began to tremble. She scrolled further back. There were smaller transfers, $500 here, $800 there, stretching back months. All to the same account, all authorized, apparently, by Mark. She had never received a notification because he must have changed the settings, removed her alerts, done it all while she was baking cookies and writing cards and believing she was part of a partnership. Mark, she called, her voice unnervingly calm. Can you come here? He appeared in the doorway, beer in hand. What? Look at the screen. He looked. His face didn't change, not a flicker of surprise or guilt. That was the worst part. He had expected her to find out eventually. He just didn't care. That's our money, Sarah said. $12,000. Most of it was my freelance earnings, by the way. Yours went to your car payments and your golf club membership. And you gave it to your mother. She needed it for the lodge rental, Mark said flatly. And for the catering. And for some renovations at the main house. It's a loan. Did you ask me? Did you even tell me? You would have said no. Yes. Sarah stood up so fast her chair rolled backward and hit the wall. I would have said no because that money was for us. For the roof repair. For the emergency fund. For my mother's medical bills that I'm still paying off, Mark. You took money from a dead woman's debt to buy your mother a nicer Christmas. He had the audacity to look annoyed. You're being hysterical. I'm not hysterical. I'm accurate. She pointed at the screen. You and your family have been bleeding me dry for months. And today they finally showed their hand. They uninvited me from Christmas because they don't see me as family. They see me as a wallet. And you're not my husband. You're their accountant. Their enabler. Their obedient little son. Mark's jaw tightened. Don't talk to me like that. Why not? It's the truth. He set his beer down on the desk, no coaster, and leaned in close. His voice dropped to a low, threatening murmur. You know what, Sarah? Maybe my mother is right. Maybe you don't fit in. Maybe you never did. You're not like us. You never will be. Sarah looked at him, really looked at him, and felt something final click into place. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even sadness. It was clarity. She sat back down, closed the bank account page, and opened a new browser tab. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. What are you doing? Mark asked. Booking a hotel for Christmas Eve, she said. Somewhere with a spa and room service and absolutely no Ashworths. You can't just watch me. She clicked confirm. Then she opened her email and began typing a message to Eleanor with copies to Richard, Julian, and Penelope. Mark tried to grab the laptop, but she twisted away. Dear Eleanor, she wrote. Thank you for the clarity. Since I am not considered family, I will be spending Christmas elsewhere. Please note that the joint account has been frozen effective immediately. Any further transfers will be reported as unauthorized. As for the $12,000, my lawyer will explain the rest. Merry Christmas, *. She hit send before Mark could stop her. Then she stood up, walked to the bedroom, and started packing a bag. Behind her, she heard Mark's phone begin to ring. Then another phone. Then the landline. The Ashworths were calling their son. And for the first time in 3 years, Sarah smiled. A real smile, sharp and free, because she had finally understood the most important truth of all. She had never been part of their family, but she had always been more than enough on her own. The hotel room smelled of synthetic pine and expensive indifference. Sarah sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the Christmas lights twinkling from the high-rise window. Below, the city glittered with festive cheer, couples walking hand in hand, families loading cars with last-minute gifts, children pressing their noses against toy store windows. She was alone, not the peaceful solitude she had pretended to want, not the quiet night in with a movie and a glass of wine. This was the raw, hollow loneliness of someone who had just learned that her marriage was a financial arrangement and her in-laws were the silent partners. Her phone buzzed again. Mark's name flashed on the screen for the 15th time. She had stopped answering after the third call, when he had moved from angry demands to tearful apologies so quickly that she could almost hear Eleanor whispering cues in the background. She's unstable. She's always been difficult. We told you, Mark. She was never one of us. Sarah turned the phone face down and walked to the minibar. She pulled out a tiny bottle of champagne, overpriced and disappointing, like so many things she had accepted in the past 3 years, and twisted off the cap. Christmas Eve, alone in a sterile hotel room. Her husband dining with the people who had drained their bank account and erased her from the family photo. She took a sip. The bubbles burned. At 9:47 p.m., boredom and restless anxiety drove her to the laptop she had packed in a moment of vengeful foresight. The hotel Wi-Fi was fast, and the after-Christmas sales had already begun online. Retailers desperate to capture the lonely and the loveless. Sarah clicked through a few sites, adding a discounted cashmere throw to her cart, then a set of ceramic knives she didn't need, then a book she would probably never read. Retail therapy, the poor woman's antidepressant. She proceeded to check out. The total was $347.18, a splurge, but she deserved it. Her freelance payment for the Henderson project would hit the account on the 26th. She typed in her card number, the expiration date, the security code. Your card has been declined. Sarah blinked. She tried again, carefully re-entering every digit. Your card has been declined. That's impossible, she murmured. There was still her personal checking account, the one Mark didn't have access to. She kept it separate after a fight in their first year about his impulsive spending on golf equipment. That account held about $4,000, her emergency fund. But the card she was using was tied to their joint savings account, the house fund. A cold finger traced her spine. She closed the shopping tab and opened her bank's website. Her hands were steady as she typed her login credentials. The muscle memory of a woman who had once checked their balance with pride, watching the number climb toward a down payment on a small house with a garden and a porch swing. The page loaded. The balance displayed in stark, digital numbers. $1,217.84. Sarah forgot to breathe. For 3 years, they had saved. Every extra freelance check, every bonus from Mark's sales job, every tax refund, every birthday gift of cash from her late mother's friends, all of it had gone into that account. They had sacrificed dinners out, vacations, new furniture. Sarah had worn shoes with worn-down heels for an extra 6 months just to add another $200 to the fund. The last time she had checked, 6 weeks ago, the balance was $87,642.13. Now it was a little over $1,000. Her vision tunneled. She clicked on transaction history, her heart pounding so hard that she could hear the blood rushing in her ears. The screen populated with rows of small, familiar debits, the automatic transfer for utilities, the monthly insurance payment, a grocery run from Thanksgiving. Then, for days ago, a single transaction that swallowed everything. Wire transfer, outgoing. Amount, $80,000. Recipient, Eleanor M. Ashworth. Memo, family Christmas gift/investment. Authorization, Mark T. Ashworth, joint owner. The remaining smaller transactions, a few hundred here, 1,000 there, had followed over the next 2 days. All to the same recipient, all authorized by Mark, all with memos that made Sarah's stomach turn. Holiday bonus for family staff, lodge rental deposit, catering advance. $80,000 for a Christmas gift, $10,000 more in incidentals. And the savings account, the dream of a house. The future she had been building brick by brick, gone. She scrolled further. The transfers went back 6 months, not just from the savings account, but from the checking account she had frozen earlier. Mark had simply moved the money before she could lock it down. Or perhaps he had never intended to hide it forever. Perhaps he had assumed she would eventually forgive him because she always had. Sarah closed the laptop, walked to the bathroom, and vomited. When she came back to herself, she was sitting on the cold tile floor, her back against the bathtub, the taste of bile and cheap champagne sour on her tongue. Her phone was buzzing again. She picked it up, not looking at the screen, and answered with a voice she didn't recognize, flat, empty, and very, very calm. Hello, Mark. Sarah, thank God. Listen, I'm sorry about earlier. My mother got in my head. You know how she is. But we can fix this. Come back to the house, and we'll talk. We'll figure out a plan. A plan, she repeated. Like the plan where you give our entire house fund to your mother as a Christmas gift. Silence. Then, you checked. Of course I checked. My card was declined for a $300 purchase. Mark, I thought it was a mistake. Instead, I found out that you've been emptying our savings for months. $80,000. That was our down payment. That was my mother's inheritance. That was everything. His voice shifted from pleading to defensive in less than a heartbeat. It's not gone. It's an investment. My mother's financial advisor has this incredible opportunity, a real estate flip. We're going to double the money by spring. I was going to tell you, but I knew you'd say no because you're so what? Responsible? Practical? Not a complete fool. That's not fair. Fair. Sarah laughed, and the sound was ugly and broken. You want to talk about fair? Let's talk about fair. I worked 60 hours a week on freelance projects while you played golf. I cooked every meal, cleaned every room, remembered every birthday. I smiled at your mother while she told me I was a disappointment. And you stole from me, from us. And you did it with a memo line that called it a gift. Sarah, please, come home. We'll call the bank. Maybe we can reverse the wire. No, we can't. Wires are final. You know that. You knew that when you pressed confirm. He started crying. Actual, wet, gasping sobs. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. My mother said she promised. Your mother, Sarah said slowly, has been planning this for months, maybe longer. She didn't just uninvite me from dinner. She made sure I had nothing left to come back to. And you helped her. That's not true. Then explain the memo. Family Christmas gift/investment. Whose idea was that phrasing? A long pause. Then, very quietly, Eleanor's. Sarah closed her eyes. The last flicker of hope guttered and died. Mark, I'm going to hang up now. Then I'm going to call a lawyer. Then I'm going to call the police. Because $80,000 isn't a family squabble. It's grand larceny. You wouldn't. Watch me. She ended the call, then immediately dialed a different number. Her attorney, the same one who had helped her mother with the will. It was Christmas Eve, but the phone rang only twice before a crisp voice answered. David Liu. What's the emergency? Sarah took a breath. David, I need you to freeze every asset that has my name on it. Joint accounts, credit cards, even the car title. And I need you to file a police report for theft. My husband and his mother just cleaned out our house fund. David didn't ask questions. He simply said, send me everything you have. I'll have a temporary restraining order on the accounts by morning. Sarah, are you safe? I'm in a hotel. Alone. For now. Good. Stay there. Don't talk to Mark again without me on the line. And don't delete anything. Screenshot every transaction. We're going to need it. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. Thank you, David. Merry Christmas, he said, and there was a grim amusement in his voice. Or at least the start of a very profitable lawsuit. After she hung up, Sarah sat in the dark for a long time. The city lights flickered beyond the window. Somewhere, a church bell began to ring. Midnight, Christmas Day. The birth of hope, the promise of renewal. She felt neither, but she felt something else. A cold, clear resolve. She had spent 3 years trying to be soft enough, small enough, grateful enough for the Ashworths. She had watched her savings disappear and told herself it was an investment in family. She had been excluded, mocked, and finally erased. No more. She opened her laptop again and began to document everything. Every transfer, every memo, every text message from Mark's family. She took screenshots of the bank statements, the email confirmation of the wire transfer, the account activity log. She downloaded 3 months of transaction history and saved it to 2 different cloud drives. Then she opened a new document and began to write. Affidavit of facts, Sarah M. Turner versus Mark T. Ashworth and Eleanor M. Ashworth. The words flowed like water from a broken dam. Dates, amounts, conversations. The night Eleanor had called her a hanger-on. The time Mark had laughed when his sister suggested Sarah was only after the family money. The dozen small cruelties that she had ignored because she believed in love. She wrote until her fingers ached and the sky outside began to lighten. A pale, watery dawn on Christmas morning. At 6 a.m., her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She opened it, expecting a wrong number or a delivery notification. Instead, she saw a photo. Eleanor Ashworth, dressed in emerald silk, raising a glass of champagne in front of a roaring fireplace. Behind her, a Christmas tree decorated in gold and white. And on the table in front of her, a large, framed document. Sarah zoomed in. It was a deed transfer. Her eyes scanned the legal text, her heart hammering. The property being transferred was a 4-bedroom house. The very house she and Mark had been saving for. The one with the garden and the porch swing. The one she had fallen in love with 6 months ago. The new owner's name, Eleanor M. Ashworth Trust. The caption below the photo read, "Thank you for the down payment, darling. Best Christmas gift ever. Zoxo Mom." Sarah stared at the screen. Then she smiled, a thin, dangerous curve of her lips, and typed a reply. "You're welcome. My lawyer will explain the rest. Merry Christmas, Eleanor." She attached every screenshot she had taken, every transfer, every memo, every authorization signature from Mark. Then she hit send, turned off her phone, and ordered room service. For the first time in 3 years, she was hungry. The room service tray sat untouched on the hotel desk. Sarah had ordered eggs, toast, and coffee, but her stomach had closed its doors somewhere between Eleanor's gloating text and the 3rd cup of bitter hotel brew. The eggs had grown cold, the toast rubbery, and the coffee had long since turned to sludge. She stared at her phone. The last message she had sent, "My lawyer will explain the rest. Merry Christmas, Eleanor," had been delivered, but there was no reply. Not that she expected one. Eleanor Ashworth was not a woman who engaged in messy digital arguments. She preferred to destroy people from a distance, with elegant cruelty and untraceable memos. Mark's phone was still switched off. Sarah had tried calling him 7 times since dawn. Each attempt went straight to voicemail, a cheerful recording of his voice promising to call back soon. The sound of it made her want to throw the phone through the window. She couldn't stay here. The hotel room, with its sterile luxury and pitying silence, had become a cage. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bank balance, $1,217.84. She saw Eleanor's champagne glass and the deed transfer. She saw Mark's face, unmoved, as he authorized the theft of their future. Victimhood had never suited her. At 8 a.m. on Christmas morning, Sarah stood up, pulled on a pair of dark jeans and a heavy coat, and grabbed her car keys. The drive to Eleanor's estate would take 45 minutes, through the sleeping suburbs, past the empty churches, and into the rolling hills where the Ashworths had built their glass and stone monument to inherited wealth. She didn't know what she was going to do when she got there. Confront them? Scream? Throw a brick through a window? Part of her hoped for the latter. But a colder, more calculating voice, the voice that had written the affidavit at 3 a.m., told her to observe, to document, to gather evidence. You can't sue them for theft if you don't have proof of what they were really doing. The roads were empty. Christmas morning in the affluent part of the state was a quiet affair. Everyone was still asleep, recovering from midnight mass or last night's gift wrapping. Sarah drove with both hands on the wheel, her jaw clenched so tight that her teeth ached. She passed a sign that read Ashworth Estates, private road. No trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. She kept driving. The gate was open. That was the first surprise. Eleanor's estate was usually guarded by an iron gate and a security code, but today it stood wide open, flanked by 2 enormous Christmas wreaths tied with gold ribbon. A line of expensive cars, Mercedes, BMWs, a sleek white Porsche, was parked along the curved driveway, spilling onto the manicured lawn. Sarah pulled her modest sedan to the side of the road, just outside the gate, and cut the engine. She sat for a moment, her breath fogging the windshield, counting the cars. 23, 31 if she included the ones tucked around the corner near the guest house. Immediate blood relatives only, Eleanor had said. A very intimate gathering. There were over 30 cars. Even if each car carried 2 people, that was 60 guests, and the Ashworth bloodline was not that prolific. Sarah grabbed her phone from the passenger seat, checked that the camera was working, and slipped out of the car. The cold bit through her coat immediately, but she barely felt it. Her blood was hot with fury. She walked along the edge of the driveway, staying in the shadows of the tall hedges that lined the property. The main house loomed ahead, a sprawling, modern mansion of floor-to-ceiling windows and gray stone. Every light was on. From outside, she could hear the thrum of music, a string quartet playing something classical and festive. Laughter drifted through the walls, warm and insufferable. Sarah circled around the side of the house, toward the great room where Eleanor always held her formal dinners. The windows there were enormous, 12 feet tall, with no curtains, because Eleanor liked her guests to see and be seen. It was the architectural equivalent of a smirk. She reached the first window and peered inside. The dining room was a masterpiece of holiday excess. A table that could seat 40 stretched across the polished marble floor, covered in white linen and gold chargers. Centerpieces of fresh pine and white roses towered above crystal glasses and silver flatware. A full bar had been set up in the corner, manned by a tuxedoed bartender. Waiters in black uniforms wove between the guests, carrying trays of champagne and caviar blinis. And the guests, there were at least 50 of them. Sarah pressed her face closer to the cold glass, counting. Men in tailored suits, women in designer gowns, children in velvet dresses and miniature tuxedos. Everyone laughing, drinking, embracing. It was not a family dinner. It was a ball. Downsized, Eleanor had said. Just the core Ashworths. Sarah's breath fogged the window. She wiped it away with her sleeve and scanned the room, looking for Mark. He would be near the head of the table. That was his place. The favored son, the golden child. She found him at the far end of the room, standing near the fireplace, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He was wearing the new navy suit she had bought him for his birthday, the one she had saved for months to afford. He was laughing. The sound didn't carry through the glass, but she could see it in the way his shoulders shook, the way his head tilted back. He was relaxed, comfortable. He was exactly where he belonged. And then she saw who he was laughing with. A woman stood beside him, close enough that her bare shoulder brushed his arm. She was tall and slender, with honey blonde hair swept into an elegant chignon. Her gown was crimson red, cut low in the back, and she wore diamonds at her ears and throat. Her face was turned toward Mark, her smile wide and intimate, the smile of someone who had known him for a very long time. Vanessa Ashworth? No, Vanessa had never taken Mark's name. Vanessa St. Clair, the ex-fiancée. The woman Eleanor had once described as the one who got away at a family dinner, while Sarah sat silently across the table, a forkful of tasteless salmon halfway to her mouth. Sarah had seen photos of Vanessa on social media, the ones Mark had forgotten to hide, the ones that showed them yachting in the Mediterranean and skiing in Gstaad. Vanessa was a hedge fund heiress, a former model, a woman who traveled in the same rarefied circles as the Ashworths. Eleanor had adored her. When Mark broke off the engagement, something about Vanessa's wandering eye, Eleanor had mourned for 6 months. And now here she was, at the intimate family gathering, standing next to Sarah's husband, wearing diamonds that probably cost more than Sarah's stolen house fund. Sarah's phone was already in her hand, recording through the glass. She zoomed in on Vanessa's face, then panned across the room. The dozens of guests, the lavish decorations, the bartender, the waiters. Then she zoomed back to Mark. He reached out and touched Vanessa's arm. Not a casual brush, a deliberate, familiar gesture. His fingers lingered on her bare skin for a full 3 seconds. Vanessa leaned into him, her red lips parting in a laugh. Sarah lowered the phone. Her hand was shaking. She forced herself to breathe, to think. This was not a surprise affair. This was not a last-minute change of plans. This had been orchestrated for weeks, maybe months. Eleanor had emptied the bank account to fund this party. Eleanor had uninvited Sarah to make room for Vanessa, and Mark had gone along with all of it. No, not just gone along with it. He had authored it. He had signed the wire transfers. He had frozen Sarah out of the account. He had lied to her face, over and over, while planning a Christmas celebration with the woman he should have married. Sarah took a step back from the window, her heel crunching on a patch of frozen grass. The sound was soft, but inside the room, a dog began to bark. One of Eleanor's tiny white lapdogs, the one that always yapped at Sarah's ankles. A few guests turned toward the window. Sarah ducked behind a holly bush, her heart pounding. She waited, counting her breaths, until the dog quieted and the guests looked away. Then she crept along the side of the house, toward the back terrace. The terrace doors were glass, too, but these were slightly ajar. A servant must have left them open to let out the smoke from the fireplace. Sarah eased closer, listening. Completely unfair, but what can you do? That was Penelope's voice, Mark's sister. Mark finally has the chance to correct his mistake. Mother has been waiting for this for years. Vanessa is so much better suited to the family. Another woman agreed. I never understood what he saw in that Sarah person. So ordinary. Don't be cruel, a third voice said, but it was laughing. She did fund half of this party, after all. The least she could do. Sarah pressed her back against the cold stone wall of the house. Her breath came in shallow, ragged gasps. They knew. They all knew. The guests, the family, even the servants. Everyone was in on it. The intimate gathering was a joke, a cover story. The real purpose was to reinstate Vanessa while Sarah was locked out of her own life. She forced herself to listen for another minute. The women moved on to discussing Vanessa's new dress, her recent promotion at the hedge fund, her plans to buy a vacation home in the south of France. Not once did anyone mention Sarah's name with anything but contempt or pity. Then she heard Mark's voice, coming from somewhere near the terrace door. He was closer than she had realized. Just have to get through the rest of the night. She's not going to do anything drastic. She doesn't have the money for a lawyer anyway. Vanessa's voice, low and sultry. Are you sure? She seemed pretty angry on the phone. She's always angry. That's her whole personality. My mother was right. She never fit in. You, on the other hand, his voice dropped to a murmur that Sarah couldn't quite catch. But she heard Vanessa's reply clearly enough. Then why did you marry her in the first place? A pause. Then Mark's voice, flat and dismissive. I was young. I thought love was enough. Turns out, love doesn't pay for a house in the Hamptons. Sarah closed her eyes. The words should have shattered her. Instead, they hardened something inside her. A cold, sharp core of fury that felt almost like peace. She opened her eyes, raised her phone, and recorded the rest of the conversation. Every word, every laugh, every casual cruelty. When they finally moved away from the door, Sarah slipped back around the house, through the garden, and out to the road. She got into her car, started the engine, and sat for a long moment with her hands on the wheel. The audio file was saved. The screenshots were saved. The bank records were saved. She had everything she needed, not just for a divorce, but for a lawsuit that would strip the Ashworths of every penny they had stolen. But she wanted more than money. She wanted them to see her face when she won. Sarah put the car in reverse, turned around, and drove back to the hotel. On the way, she called David Liu again. I have something for you, she said. Recordings, photos, witness statements, essentially. They're having a 60-person gala while claiming it was an intimate family dinner. And Mark is there with his ex-fiancée. On Christmas, after emptying our accounts to pay for it. David was silent for a moment. Then, Sarah, do you understand what you're holding? This isn't just financial fraud. This is fraud, conspiracy, and potentially alienation of affection depending on the state. If you want to go after them, really go after them, we can do it. Do it, Sarah said, but not yet. I want to wait until they think they've won. That's dangerous. That's strategic. She ended the call and drove into the rising sun, leaving the Ashworth estate behind. Behind her, the party continued. The champagne, the caviar, the diamonds, and the woman who had taken her place. But Sarah was no longer the victim standing outside the window. She was the storm gathering on on the horizon. The drive back to Eleanor's estate took 17 minutes. Sarah had not planned to return. She had driven away with her evidence, her fury, and a cold, strategic mind that whispered, wait, gather more, strike when they least expected. But somewhere between the hotel and the Ashworth gate, something had shifted. Perhaps it was the memory of Mark's voice. Love doesn't pay for a house in the Hamptons. Perhaps it was Vanessa's diamonds, flashing like a dare through the window glass. Perhaps it was simply the realization that she had spent 3 years being polite, being small, being grateful for crumbs from a table that was never meant to include her. No more. She parked her sedan in the same spot outside the gate, but this time she did not hide. She walked up the driveway with her head high, her boots crunching on the frost-covered gravel. The front door, a massive slab of oak and iron, was unlocked. A final act of arrogance from a family that believed no one would dare cross their threshold without an invitation. Sarah pushed the door open and stepped inside. The foyer was a cathedral of excess. A 12-foot Christmas tree stood in the center, draped in gold ribbon and thousands of tiny white lights. Garlands of fresh pine wound up the staircase, their fragrance so thick it was almost cloying. A marble bust of some Ashworth ancestor glared down at her from a pedestal, its stone eyes somehow conveying the same haughty disapproval as Eleanor's. From the dining room came the sound of laughter, clinking glasses, the murmur of privileged conversation. Sarah walked toward it, her footsteps silent on the Persian runner. She passed a mirror, an antique, gold-leaf thing, and caught her own reflection. Her face was pale, but her eyes were bright. She looked, she realized, like a woman who had nothing left to lose. The double doors to the dining room were open. Sarah stepped through them. The effect was instantaneous. The laughter died first, a single, choking cough from someone near the bar. Then the clinking of champagne glasses faltered, one by one, like dominoes falling. A woman in a sequined gown dropped her fork with a clatter that echoed in the sudden silence. A man stopped mid-sentence, his mouth still open, his wine glass frozen halfway to his lips. Within 3 seconds, every person in that room had turned to look at her. 50 guests, 50 pairs of eyes, 50 variations of shock, horror, and, in a few cases, poorly concealed glee. The string quartet in the corner played on for another bar, realized something was wrong, and trailed off into an awkward, squeaking silence. The only sound was the crackle of the fireplace and the distant yapping of Eleanor's lapdog. Sarah stood just inside the doorway, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, her expression calm. She had not raised her voice. She had not thrown a punch. She had simply appeared, and that, she knew, was more devastating than any tantrum. At the head of the table, Eleanor Ashworth rose from her chair like a cobra uncoiling. She was dressed in emerald silk, the same gown from the photograph, with a diamond brooch at her throat that caught the firelight and scattered it into sharp, angry sparks. Sarah, Eleanor's voice was ice. You were not invited. I know, Sarah said pleasantly. That's why I'm here. A ripple of nervous laughter from the guests. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. This is a private family gathering. You are causing a scene. I will ask you once, politely, to leave before I call security. Sarah did not move. She tilted her head slightly, taking in the room. The 40-foot table, the gold chargers, the crystal glasses, the waiters frozen mid-pour. She took in the faces. Penelope, pale and furious. Richard, her father-in-law, pretending to study his wine glass. Vanessa St. Clair, suddenly very interested in the arrangement of pine cones on the centerpiece. And Mark. He had jumped up from his seat so fast that his chair had tipped backward and crashed to the marble floor. He stood now, half-crouched, his face a mask of terror and desperate calculation. His eyes met Sarah's for a fraction of a second, and then he looked away. That small gesture told her everything she needed to know. Security won't be necessary, Sarah said, raising her voice just enough to carry to every corner of the room. I won't be staying long. I just came to see something. She smiled, a cold, beautiful smile that she had practiced in the hotel mirror. I just came to see what an $80,000 Christmas dinner looks like. The silence that followed was so absolute that Sarah could hear the ice melting in someone's glass. After all, she continued, her voice clear and steady, it was paid for entirely with my life savings. A woman near the fireplace gasped. A man choked on his whiskey. Someone whispered, 80,000? And the whisper spread through the room like wildfire, growing louder with each repetition. Eleanor's face had turned the color of an overripe beet. Her hands, resting on the table, were trembling with rage. How dare you, she hissed. How dare you come into my home and spread these vicious lies? Lies. Sarah pulled her phone from her coat pocket and held it up. The screen displayed a screenshot of the wire transfer. $80,000 to Eleanor M. Ashworth, dated 4 days prior. Shall I show everyone? The memo line was family Christmas gift/investment, except I never authorized it. And the money came from our joint savings account, the one we had been building for a down payment on a house. She turned slowly, letting the phone face each section of the room. Mark signed for it. Mark authorized it. And Mark, she said, her voice finally cracking with emotion, has been lying to me for months. Every eye in the room swiveled to Mark. He stood frozen, his face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Vanessa had moved discreetly away from him, edging toward the bar. Even Eleanor's lapdog had stopped yapping, as if sensing the shift in the room's energy. "Sarah, please," Mark finally managed. His voice was a hoarse whisper. "Not here, not in front of everyone. Let's go outside and talk." "Talk?" Sarah laughed, a short, bitter sound. "You mean lie? You mean explain how you and your mother emptied our accounts to throw a party for the woman you should have married? You mean tell me that love doesn't pay for a house in the Hamptons?" Mark recoiled as if she had slapped him. "You were listening. I was recording." Sarah held up her phone again. "I have everything. Every conversation, every transfer, every memo, every text from your mother thanking me for the down payment on her new house." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I have enough evidence to put both of you in civil court for the next decade." Eleanor drew herself up to her full height. Her face was still red, but her voice had regained some of its haughty composure. "You are a gold-digging little." "Careful, Eleanor." Sarah's voice was soft, almost kind. "Everything you say right now will be entered into evidence. The recording is still running." She turned her phone slightly, showing the red rec indicator at the top of the screen. Eleanor's mouth snapped shut. For a long moment, no one moved. The guests sat rigid in their chairs, caught between the desire to flee and the desperate need to see how this would end. Vanessa had retreated to the far corner of the room, her back to the wall, her crimson gown suddenly looking less glamorous and more like a warning sign. Sarah looked at Mark one last time. He was crying now, silent, helpless tears that dripped off his chin and onto his navy suit. The suit she had bought him, the suit he had worn to impress another woman. "I didn't come here to scream," Sarah said quietly. "I didn't come here to throw things or break your precious decorations. I came here to show you something." She stepped forward into the light of the chandelier and spread her arms wide. "I came here to show you that I am not the woman you thought I was. I am not desperate. I am not broken. And I am certainly not alone." She lowered her arms and looked Eleanor directly in the eye. "I have a lawyer. I have evidence. And I have the truth." She turned to face the guests. "Enjoy your dinner," she said. "It cost me $80,000. I hope the caviar was worth it." Then she walked back through the double doors, across the marble foyer, and out into the cold Christmas night. She did not run. She did not look back. She walked with the steady, unhurried pace of a woman who had already won. Behind her, the silence lasted another 10 seconds. Then the whispering began, a rising tide of speculation, accusation, and the unmistakable sound of a family tearing itself apart. Sarah reached her car, unlocked the door, and sat behind the wheel. Her hands were shaking. Her heart was pounding. But she was not crying. She was smiling. She pulled out her phone, stopped the recording, and sent a single text to David Liu. "Phase 1 complete. They know I'm coming. Let's prepare for Phase 2. David's reply came within seconds. "Merry Christmas, Sarah. The paperwork is already filed." She started the engine, turned on the heater, and drove away from the Ashworth estate for the last time. Behind her, the mansion glittered in the dawn light, a monument to greed, betrayal, and a family that had finally met its match. Sarah had not left. The front door had closed behind her. The cold air had bitten her cheeks. Her car had been 20 yards away, keys in hand. Freedom a single breath away. But something had stopped her. Perhaps it was the memory of Mark's tears, not real remorse. She realized now, but the panicked sweat of a man watching his carefully constructed lies collapse. Perhaps it was Eleanor's red face, so full of fury and so empty of shame. Or perhaps it was the simple truth that she was tired of walking away while they kept talking. She had turned around, walked back through the front door, and retraced her steps to the dining room. The guests were still whispering. Mark was still standing by the overturned chair. Eleanor was still frozen in her emerald silk, her mouth a tight, bloodless line. And Vanessa had not moved from the corner, but her eyes were wide, her carefully applied lipstick smudged as if she had been biting her lips. Sarah stopped in the exact spot she had occupied before, the double doors framing her like a portrait of righteous fury. She held up her phone again, but this time she also reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, printouts, crisp and damning, that she had made at the hotel business center before driving back. "I forgot something," she said, her voice calm and conversational. "I forgot to let you finish lying." Mark's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Sarah, please, let me explain. The money, it was a temporary loan. That's all. A loan to help my parents secure a luxury vacation property. Vanessa's family was selling it, and the deal was too good to pass up. I was going to pay you back, every penny, with interest." A murmur rippled through the guests. A few nodded, grasping at the straw of explanation. "A loan. Yes, that sounded reasonable. Families lend each other money all the time." Sarah smiled. It was not a kind smile. "A loan," she repeated, "to buy a vacation property from Vanessa's family." "Yes." Mark's voice gained a little strength, as if he believed his own lie. "It's a villa in Tuscany. Vanessa's parents have owned it for years. They offered it to us at a fraction of its value." My parents needed quick capital, and I knew we had the savings just sitting there. I was going to surprise you when the deal closed. Eleanor stepped forward, her composure reassembling itself like armor. Sarah, you really should be honored to contribute to the family status. That villa will be an Ashworth asset for generations. Your little savings account was just gathering dust. We turned it into something meaningful. Something meaningful, Sarah echoed. She looked down at the printouts in her hand. Shall I read you what the memo line actually said? Not the one on the bank transfer. The one on the text message you sent to Eleanor 4 days ago. The color drained from Mark's face again. What text message? This one. Sarah held up her phone, displaying a screenshot of a conversation between Mark and his mother. She had not intercepted it. That would have been illegal. But David Liu had subpoenaed the phone records that morning, and the carrier had complied faster than anyone expected. Shall I read it aloud? Or would you prefer to do the honors? Mark lunged for the phone. Sarah stepped back, and two of the male guests, friends of Richard's, men with kind eyes and a sense of justice, moved instinctively to block him. Read it, one of them said quietly. Sarah cleared her throat and read. Mark, the $80,000 will clear tomorrow. Transfer it to your account first, then to Mom's. Don't use joint for the memo. Use investment. Eleanor, excellent. Vanessa's father confirmed the partnership stake. Once the villa deal closes, you'll have a seat at the table, and Vanessa will be at Christmas dinner. Mark, Sarah doesn't suspect anything. She thinks we're saving for a house. Eleanor, good. She was never right for you. Vanessa brings real value, connections, capital, class. Sarah brings nothing. Mark, I know. I should have married Vanessa when I had the chance. Eleanor, you have another chance now. Make it happen. The room was silent. Even the fire seemed to hold its breath. Sarah folded the printouts and tucked them back into her pocket. That's not a loan, she said softly. That's a conspiracy. You didn't borrow my money to buy a villa for the family. You gave it away as a bribe, to buy your way back into Vanessa's life. Because I didn't bring enough financial value to the family. Vanessa made a small, strangled sound. She had pressed herself against the wall, her crimson gown bunched in her fists. Mark, you told me the money was from your personal account. You said you had savings from before the marriage. You said. He lied, Sarah said. That's what he does. He lies to everyone. He lied to me about loving me. He lied to you about being available. And he lied to every person in this room about the kind of man he is. Mark was shaking now, his whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. Sarah, I can fix this. I'll call the bank. I'll get the money back. You can't, she said flatly. Wires are final. You knew that when you pressed confirm. You knew it when you typed family Christmas gift. You knew it when you sat here, drinking my whiskey, wearing my suit, laughing with your ex-fiancée while I sat alone in a hotel room wondering how I was going to pay for my mother's medical bills. She took a step closer to him, just one, but he flinched as if she had raised a hand. You didn't just give away our future, Mark. You just bought yourself a divorce. The word divorce landed like a bomb. Eleanor gasped. Penelope burst into tears. Richard set down his wine glass with a heavy thunk and walked out of the room without a word. And Mark sank to his knees on the marble floor, his hands covering his face, his shoulders heaving with silent sobs. Sarah looked down at him without pity. Then she turned to face the guests. For those of you who don't know me, she said, my name is Sarah Turner. I was married to this man for 3 years. I worked 2 jobs to help us save for a home. I cooked his meals, cleaned his house, and smiled at his mother's insults. And in return, he and his family stole over $90,000 from me, every penny I had in the world. She held up the printouts again. I have bank records, text messages, and audio recordings of Mark and Eleanor admitting everything. I have already filed a police report for grand larceny. I have also filed for divorce and a civil lawsuit to recover every cent, plus damages. If any of you were thinking of doing business with the Ashworths in the future, I would advise you to think again. She turned to Eleanor, who stood rigid and purple-faced, her diamonds trembling against her throat. You wanted me to be honored to contribute to the family status. So here's my contribution. I'm going to make sure everyone in this city knows exactly how the Ashworths built their status. On the backs of the people they pretended to love. Eleanor opened her mouth, to scream, to curse, to deny, but no sound came out. For the first time in her life, Eleanor Ashworth had nothing to say. Sarah walked to the table, picked up a champagne flute, and raised it in a toast. Merry Christmas, everyone. May your consciences be cleaner than mine. She drank the champagne in a single, long swallow. Then she set the glass down, turned on her heel, and walked out of the dining room for the second time. This time, no one whispered behind her. This time, they were too busy staring at the man on his knees and the woman who had finally, utterly, destroyed him. Outside, the sun had fully risen, painting the frost-covered lawn in shades of gold and pink. Sarah walked to her car, got in, and sat for a moment with her hands on the steering wheel. Her phone buzzed, a text from David Liu. The police just picked up Mark's mother for questioning. The wire fraud unit is very interested in her investment scheme. Where are you? Sarah typed back, leaving the crime scene. I'll come to your office after the holiday. Take the day off, David replied. You've earned it. And Sarah, that was brilliant. She smiled, a real smile, tired and true, and started the engine. As she drove away from the Ashworth estate, she passed a small church with a sign outside, "God bless us, everyone." Sarah laughed. She didn't believe in blessings anymore, but she believed in evidence, and she believed in justice, and she believed that the best gift she had ever given herself was the courage to walk back through that door. 3 months later, the snow had melted, the crocuses had not yet dared to bloom, and Sarah Turner sat in the sunlit front room of her new apartment, watching the city wake up. The apartment was on the 4th floor of a renovated brick building in a neighborhood she could never have afforded 3 months ago. But 3 months ago, she had been married to Mark Ashworth, and her money had been his money, and his money had been Eleanor's money, and none of it had ever really belonged to her. Now, everything in this apartment was hers. The pale gray walls, the second-hand sofa she had reupholstered herself, the oak bookshelf filled with novels she had been meaning to read for years, the small balcony where she had hung a bird feeder and a string of fairy lights that twinkled even in daylight, and the bank balance on her laptop screen, $91 for 32.18, fully restored, plus interest, plus damages. She closed the laptop and smiled. The court proceedings had been swift, brutal, and deeply satisfying. David Liu had filed a motion to freeze all of Mark's personal and joint assets within 48 hours of Christmas Day. Mark had tried to fight it, hired a lawyer, filed a countersuit, claimed that the $80,000 had been a marital investment, and that Sarah had consented verbally. But Sarah had the screenshots. She had the text messages. She had the audio recording of Mark telling Vanessa that love didn't pay for a house in the Hamptons. And she had the testimony of the bank teller who remembered Mark authorizing the wire transfer alone, after asking whether a spouse's signature was required. It was not for joint accounts. But the teller's recollection of Mark's nervous laughter and his whispered phone call to Mom had been enough to tilt the scales. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Kerrigan who had once prosecuted financial fraud for the state, took less than an hour to issue her ruling. Asterisk, the money in the joint savings account was demonstrably accumulated primarily through the earnings of the plaintiff, Sarah Turner. The defendant, Mark Ashworth, transferred $80,000 to a third party, his mother, Eleanor Ashworth, without the plaintiff's knowledge or consent. The purported investment was not a marital asset nor a joint venture. Therefore, the defendant is ordered to reimburse the plaintiff in full, plus 8% interest from the date of transfer, as well as all legal fees incurred. The marriage is hereby dissolved on grounds of financial misconduct and irreconcilable differences. Asterisk, Mark had wept in the courtroom. Eleanor, seated in the gallery, had stormed out so loudly that the bailiff threatened her with contempt. Vanessa St. Clair had not attended, but her lawyer had sent a letter to the court disavowing any involvement in the alleged business venture and stating that Vanessa had ended all personal and professional ties with the Ashworth family. The business venture, the luxury villa in Tuscany, the partnership stake, the promise of generational wealth, had collapsed within a week of the courtroom drama. Vanessa's father, a shrewd man who valued reputation above all else, had publicly announced that his family would not be associated with individuals who engage in financial deceit. The villa deal was canceled, the partnership was voided, and the St. Clairs had quietly donated a sum of money to a legal aid fund for victims of domestic financial abuse, an act that Sarah suspected was more about public relations than principle, but she accepted it nonetheless. Mark had been forced to liquidate everything: his sports car, his golf club membership, the collection of vintage watches his father had given him, even the navy suit Sarah had bought him, all sold at auction to pay back what he had stolen. His father, Richard, had refused to help, finally admitting in a deposition that he had suspected Eleanor's schemes for years but looked the other way. The marriage between Richard and Eleanor was now the subject of its own bitter divorce proceedings. And Eleanor herself? She had been charged with fraud and conspiracy to commit financial abuse. Her lawyer was fighting the charges, but her assets had been frozen, and her intimate gathering of Christmas had become Exhibit A in a criminal case that was making headlines across the state. The mansion on the hill had been put up for sale. The lapdog had been rehomed to a childless couple in Vermont. Sarah took no pleasure in the destruction. That was what she had learned in the 3 months since Christmas. Revenge, she discovered, was a fire that burned the arsonist as surely as the target. She had watched Mark crumble, Eleanor rage, Vanessa flee, and she had felt nothing. Not triumph, not satisfaction, just a hollow absence of pain, which was something but not enough. What she wanted was peace. And peace, she was slowly discovering, was not the absence of conflict. It was the presence of something better. The moving truck had arrived on a Saturday. Sarah's friends, the real ones, the ones who had never liked Mark but had smiled for her sake, had shown up with pizza, packing tape, and a shocking amount of cheerful profanity. Her college roommate, Lena, had driven 6 hours to help her hang curtains. Her neighbor from the old apartment, a retired librarian named Mrs. Chun, had brought a pot of soup and a speech about how that man never deserved you anyway. They had filled the new apartment with laughter and chaos and the smell of fresh paint. They had argued about where the sofa should go and drunk cheap wine out of coffee mugs and stayed until the stars came out. And when they had finally left, one by one, hugging her at the door with promises to visit again, Sarah had stood in the middle of her empty, beautiful living room and cried. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief. She was free, truly, utterly, irrevocably free. The New Year's Eve party was small. Just Lena, Mrs. Chun, a few co-workers from Sarah's new full-time job at a design firm, and a man named Alex who taught history at the local community college and had a laugh that sounded like wind chimes. He had offered to help her build the bookshelf last week, and she had let him, and they had spent 3 hours talking about Russian literature and the best way to make pancakes. Nothing romantic, not yet, but the possibility hung in the air like the fairy lights on her balcony. Soft, warm, promising. At midnight, they all clinked glasses, sparkling cider for Sarah, because she had sworn off champagne, and shouted Happy New Year into the cold, clear night. Fireworks exploded somewhere over the river, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Alex looked at her and smiled, and Sarah smiled back. Later, after the guests had gone and the dishes were washed and the only sound was the hum of the refrigerator, she sat down at her laptop. The bank balance still read $91,432.18. She had already paid off her mother's medical bills. She had already set aside 6 months of rent. She had already donated $1,000 to a shelter for women fleeing financial abuse. A small gesture, but a meaningful one. She thought about that Christmas Eve, alone in the sterile hotel room. Her card declined, her world in ruins. She thought about driving to Eleanor's estate, pressing her face against the cold glass, watching her husband laugh with another woman. She thought about the moment she had walked through the front door, her heart pounding, her voice steady, and spoken the truth in front of 50 strangers. She had been so afraid, but she had done it anyway. And now, 3 months later, she was here, in her own apartment, with her own money, and a life that was entirely, gloriously hers. Sarah closed the laptop, walked to the balcony, and leaned against the railing. The city sparkled below her, a constellation of lights and possibilities. Somewhere out there, Mark was sitting in a cramped, one-bedroom apartment, drowning in legal debt to his own mother, his reputation shredded, his future reduced to a series of payment plans and regret. Somewhere out there, Eleanor was fighting a criminal case she could not win, her mansion sold, her social circle evaporated. Somewhere out there, Vanessa was pretending none of it had ever happened. Sarah did not wish them well, but she did not wish them ill either. She simply let them go, like smoke from a fire that had finally burned itself out. Being uninvited from that Christmas dinner, she realized, was the greatest gift she had ever received. If Eleanor had not excluded her, she might never have checked the bank account. If she had never checked the bank account, she might have gone on believing in a marriage that was built on lies. If she had gone on believing, she might have lost everything, not just her money, but her sense of self. Instead, she had lost only the weight of people who had never truly loved her. And in its place, she had gained something far more valuable: peace. She turned from the balcony, walked back inside, and curled up on her second-hand sofa with a book and a cup of tea. The fairy lights twinkled, the city hummed, and Sarah Turner, for the first time in years, felt completely, utterly at home. The end.